It only took 7 whispered words, spoken off camera, for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to shake a 3-hour congressional hearing to its core. In a room built for power, where microphones are supposed to go silent when the cameras stop rolling, one stayed on. And what it captured wasn't just a mistake. It was a sentence no official ever wanted the public to hear. Kash Patel thought it was erased. He thought he was in control. But when AOC pressed play, the chamber fell quiet, and America leaned in. What happens when the lie is whispered, but the truth gets recorded? What if we've been missing everything that mattered, simply because the mic wasn't supposed to pick it up? This story is a dramatization, inspired by real tensions, real power struggles, and the haunting question that lingers in every democracy. If no one's listening, does the truth still matter? The characters and events are fictional, but the emotions, the stakes, and the questions, they're all real. This is not just a story, this is a mirror. The ceiling stretched higher than most church steeples, vaulted, cold, and intentionally echo-prone. Each cough, each shifting chair leg, ricocheted like a verdict through the chamber. Fluorescent spotlights bathed the witness table in a sterile, unforgiving white, casting harsh shadows beneath the eyes of those who sat there. This was no room for forgiveness. It was built to make people sweat. The walls were lined with American flags, but none seemed to offer comfort. Instead, they stood like silent judges, fabric witnesses to stories the cameras never caught. At the far end, a brass placard read "Oversight and Accountability," though the room had rarely lived up to either word. At the center sat Kash Patel, straight-backed, jaw firm, hands folded a little too perfectly on the polished oak desk. He wore a tailored navy suit, subtle pinstripes, cufflinks that caught the light. Flanking him were 2 attorneys, both expressionless, except for the slight tapping of one man's index finger against a yellow legal pad. Patel's face betrayed nothing, but the faint muscle twitch at the edge of his jaw said otherwise. Camera lenses zoomed in, notes shuffled. Somewhere a reporter whispered, "This might be the one that blows." The chairwoman cleared her throat. And then, the doors at the rear of the chamber opened. In walked Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She wasn't flanked by aides. She didn't need a handler or a publicist whispering last-minute strategy. She walked with a deliberate calm, shoulders square, heels steady, eyes unflinching. In her hand, a thin folder, crimson red, unmarked. One veteran in the gallery leaned forward. Another muttered, "She brought the kill file." AOC didn't make eye contact with Patel as she approached her seat on the dais, but everyone saw the shift. Patel straightened. One of his lawyers leaned in, whispered something. He didn't nod, didn't blink. The atmosphere shifted. This wasn't a procedural hearing anymore. This was personal, and everyone knew it. In the gallery, an elderly woman clutched a laminated photo of her son, deployed under a program Patel once oversaw. A retired colonel tapped his cane anxiously against the marble. 2 college students, interns perhaps, live-streamed from the upper row, whispering into their phones, "She's gonna torch him today. I feel it." Behind the witness table, a tiny red light blinked on the edge of the microphone. Live. Then, bang, the gavel slammed down. "Today's hearing will come to order," the chairwoman said, voice formal but eyes sharp. "We are here to investigate alleged information suppression during Mr. Patel's tenure with the Department of Homeland Security." AOC's expression remained neutral, but viewers watching at home might have noticed something peculiar. Her fingers tapping rhythmically against the folder. 3 beats, then stillness. Patel leaned forward, microphone adjusted. "I welcome the opportunity to clarify recent mischaracterizations," he began, his tone confident, measured, almost too rehearsed. But AOC didn't move. She didn't even blink. She just watched, like someone waiting for the lie to finish walking in, so the truth could enter behind it. Outside the chamber, journalists crowded portable screens. Some stations paused their coverage of a breaking weather event. The Chiron read, "Patel faces AOC in live oversight battle. Will new evidence emerge?" No one knew yet. But inside the Capitol, in a room too cold for comfort and too bright for evasion, something was beginning. Kash Patel adjusted the microphone with practiced ease, as if it were merely another podium from one of his many interviews, think tank panels or closed-door briefings. He didn't rush. He didn't stammer. His eyes swept the committee dais like a courtroom veteran sizing up a jury he'd already read. The suit helped. Deep navy, clean white collar, and a tie that whispered, not shouted. Image management, after all, was something he had always understood. "Madam Chair," he began, voice calm, carrying just enough gravitas to sound important but not urgent. "Let me start by stating unequivocally, there has been no tampering, no manipulation, and certainly no suppression of information during my time at DHS. These allegations are nothing more than partisan fiction, fueled by midterm theatrics and Twitter outrage." He smiled, just barely, as he said the last part, pausing long enough for the words to settle in the chamber. The smirk was calibrated, not accidental. It was the same half-smile that had become his trademark during television interviews, particularly when facts became optional. "There's nothing you'll find," he added, tone almost playful, "because there's nothing there." A few committee members exchanged glances. One, an older Republican senator, leaned back in his chair, exhaled as if he'd just dodged another tedious scandal. On the other end of the spectrum, a progressive representative from the Pacific Northwest began doodling on the corner of his notes. Boredom had arrived early, and Patel knew it. He was banking on it. Outside the chamber, the narrative was already shifting. News tickers on cable channels labeled the hearing as routine oversight, and anchors speculated this was likely to fizzle unless new evidence emerges. Patel was winning the optics game. Again. He leaned into his binder, flipping a page as if referring to some complex procedural memo, though anyone watching closely could tell it was blank. The move wasn't about content. It was choreography. "I understand the concern around government transparency," he continued, now slipping into a softer register meant to feign reason. "But transparency should be rooted in facts, not fiction, in process, not performance." At that, he glanced toward AOC, briefly. Not long enough to start a battle, but just enough to let the room know he wasn't afraid of one. She didn't react. She didn't flinch. She simply kept tapping the edge of her crimson folder. 3 quiet beats, then silence. The room felt like it had skipped a breath. One of Patel's lawyers whispered something near his ear. He gave a short nod, then resumed with a closing tone that sounded almost like a corporate mission statement. "I'm here today in good faith," he said, "because the American people deserve reassurance, not rhetoric." Another pause, deliberate, letting the phrase linger like air freshener after a controlled burn. The chairwoman offered a polite nod and thanked him for his testimony. No one interrupted. No one challenged. For the moment, Patel had done what he came to do: calm the room, disarm the story, and reframe himself as the adult in a circus of partisans. But AOC hadn't spoken yet, and across the chamber, in the gallery, a woman in her 60s with folded hands muttered to her husband. "He talks like the cameras are his mirror," the husband replied without looking away from the podium. He better hope they weren't recording after the show ended. Patel folded his hands again, eyes forward, calm restored, for now. But 3 beats continued tapping from across the room. The mic was still on. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez didn't look up as she opened the crimson folder. The room quieted almost imperceptibly, not out of protocol but curiosity. There was something unnerving about the way she moved, deliberate, unhurried, as if she already knew what lay ahead and was simply waiting for the others to catch up. The pages made no sound, but the tension crackled. "Mr. Patel," she began, her tone professional, measured, devoid of drama. "I'd like to walk through the operational timeline you provided regarding the Suppression Review Initiative at DHS." She turned a page without looking down. "According to your sworn affidavit, the directive to prioritize content flagged as publicly sensitive was issued in early March. March 3rd, to be precise. Is that correct?" Patel leaned toward the microphone, his expression perfectly neutral. "Yes, Congresswoman, that is correct." She nodded slightly. "And yet internal email threads from February 18th, 2 weeks prior, show you referencing that directive in past tense. Specifically, you told a senior official, 'Now that the suppression filter is finally live, We should see cleaner dashboards. There was a pause, not long, just enough to be felt. Patel's eyes flicked down to the folder in front of him, then up again. That email is taken out of context. The language refers to a pilot program discussed in preliminary stages, not the formal rollout. AOC didn't interrupt. She didn't press. She let him land his point in full, waited 3 seconds, then continued, calm as ever. Understood. So the suppression protocol was discussed informally before the public directive was issued. Patel hesitated, then offered a polished half-smile. Congresswoman, interagency coordination often requires simultaneous steps. Communication isn't always linear. It was a lawyer's sentence, clean and slippery. AOC turned another page, slowly. And yet, the metadata attached to the filter's code, sourced via FOIA from DHS, lists its initial push to the server on February 16th. That's neither March 3rd nor pilot-level discussion? Patel's jaw tightened, just barely. One of his attorneys scribbled something and slid the note across. He glanced but didn't pick it up. With respect, I cannot verify technical timestamps without confirming the chain of custody for that document. AOC looked up for the first time, eyes steady. You approved the document. He didn't respond. She closed the binder gently, resting her hand atop it. I'm sure your team will clarify that in writing. A few heads in the gallery tilted. The energy in the room had shifted again, subtly but irrevocably. This was no longer a formality. This was a surgical incision, not meant to bleed yet, but enough to mark where the scalpel would return. AOC's voice dropped just a fraction. Your confidence is impressive, Mr. Patel, she said, not with sarcasm but with clinical precision. Let's hope the facts keep up. Then she leaned back, hands still on the folder, watching without blinking. Patel didn't smile this time. In the control booth upstairs, a junior C-SPAN producer leaned into his mic and whispered, Cue the reaction cam on Patel. We're staying on her until further notice. Below, the mic was still on, and the game had quietly changed. The gavel struck once, then again, echoing through the chamber like a final heartbeat. The hearing was officially adjourned. Chairs scraped, papers shuffled, laptops snapped shut. Members of Congress filtered out in clusters, speaking in hushed tones, already pivoting toward their next meetings, next sound bites, next distractions. To them, the day was done. But down at the witness table, Kash Patel remained seated. He didn't fidget, didn't rush. He waited until most of the press had packed up their cameras, until the heavy double doors at the rear began closing in slow sync, muffling the air. Then, leaning slightly to his right, just enough to look casual, he turned to his aide, a young man in a charcoal suit, eyes still scanning his notes. Kash's voice was quiet, a shade above breath. Relax, he murmured, with the kind of calm that didn't need reassurance. That part's already gone. They'll never see it. The aide didn't answer. He didn't have to. They shared a glance. The kind of glance born not of panic, but of practiced choreography. Two men who'd been here before and believed the show had ended. The cameras were down. The committee had moved on. To them, the stage lights were off, but one of them was wrong. 3 floors up and 2 chambers away, tucked in a small AV control room behind frosted glass and buzzing server panels, a young technician named Marcus Lee was wrapping up his logs. He had just started the export protocol for the day's multi-angle audio when he noticed something odd. Channel 8 was still blinking. Most channels went black the moment feeds were cut. Panel mics, desk mics, even ambient room pickup. Each one followed a script. Red meant live. Off meant safe. But Channel 8 wasn't safe. Marcus narrowed his eyes. He leaned forward, squinting at the waveform that continued to dance across the screen. Faint, low frequency, but unmistakably human. He put on his headset, rewound 3 seconds, and heard it. That part's already gone. They'll never see it. He didn't move. The words, barely audible under the din of papers and distant footsteps, rang out with an unsettling clarity. Not loud, not aggressive, just certain, almost smug. The kind of sentence someone says when they believe they've already won. Marcus sat back in his chair. The glow of the monitors reflected faintly in his glasses. He knew the name, Kash Patel. He'd read enough headlines. He also knew who had asked the most precise questions that day: AOC. And he knew what kind of sentence this was, not the kind you say if you expect to be heard. His hand hovered over the delete key, then over the export folder. His finger didn't move. He reached into his backpack, pulled out a personal flash drive, one with a cracked case and a faded sticker of a comic book hero, and inserted it quietly. No supervisor, no memo, no protocol, just instinct. He dragged the audio file over, labeled it simply Mike's 8 whisper.wav. Then he unplugged the drive, slipped it into his jacket pocket, and stood up slowly. Outside the booth, the Capitol was emptying. Offices were dimming, voices fading. Inside Marcus's chest, his heart thudded, not from fear, but from a quiet, rising certainty that something had just shifted. Something small but seismic. Because sometimes the most dangerous sentence isn't the one shouted in front of cameras. It's the one someone believes no one will ever hear. And this time, the mic was still on. Marcus sat alone in the dim blue glow of the control room, the flash drive resting on the desk like it carried its own weight. Not the physical kind, the kind you feel in your gut. He'd replayed the audio 3 more times. Each time, it hit harder. Not because the words were loud, but because they were meant never to be heard. That kind of certainty wasn't casual. It was calculated. He stared at the waveform on screen, the sentence now etched in digital echo. That part's already gone. They'll never see it. Marcus wasn't naive. He knew how things worked on the Hill. Files disappeared. Stories got buried. Whistleblowers became footnotes, if they were lucky. He was just an AV tech. He didn't have clearance or credentials, just access. And now, a choice. He looked over at the internal server terminal. A few clicks, and this could be gone forever. No trace, no accountability, no risk. Or he reached into his backpack again. Same old flash drive, same cracked case. But this time he pulled out a second item, a post-it note, yellow, bent at the corner. He stared at it for a moment before writing the words slowly, like he was afraid of what they meant. For the person who still listens. He paused, then underlined, still. No names, no explanation, just hope. He ejected the drive, pocketed it, and checked the hallway. Empty. No one noticed the AV kid. Not in a place like this. That was the job. Invisible presence. Perfect silence. Outside the chamber level, he took the long way around, down one level, then up the south stairs, avoiding the main elevators. The congressional offices lined the second floor like carefully curated storefronts. Flags outside every door, seals polished, staffers buzzing inside. Most doors had mail baskets, already overflowing with press clippings and constituent letters. Then he found the one. Office of Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, New York 14th District. The plaque glinted faintly under the hallway lights. No one was inside, just silence. Marcus looked around once, then again. He reached into his jacket, pulled out the flash drive with the folded note, and slid both into the narrow slit of the office mail basket, half buried beneath a stack of policy memos and newspaper clips. For a second, he considered knocking. But no. If this was ever going to work, it had to come without strings. No name, no story, just sound. He stepped back, hands still in his pockets. The drive was gone now, absorbed into the machine of the Capitol. Maybe it would be found. Maybe it would be ignored. But at least it was no longer hidden. As he turned and walked back toward the stairwell, his pulse steadied for the first time all night. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't even sure he'd done the right thing. But he knew one thing. If truth was going to survive this town, someone had to hear what wasn't meant to be heard. And someone had to believe silence wasn't always consent. He just hoped, truly hoped, he'd put that truth in the right hands. The envelope looked unremarkable. No return address, no markings, just a worn yellow post-it barely clinging to the front. It sat atop the morning's mail stack like it didn't belong there. AOC's chief of staff glanced at it, shrugged, and added it to the small pile beside her desk. By 8:40 a.m., the Congresswoman was already deep into a housing policy brief, one ear on NPR, the other on her aide's verbal rundown. But something about that envelope kept pulling her eyes back. It wasn't bulky, but it wasn't flat either. No franking stamp, no barcode, no internal routing code. Just handwriting in slightly shaky pen. For the person who still listens. She set her binder aside, picked it up, peeled the flap open. Inside was a single flash drive and the note, folded once. No date, no context. For a few seconds, she didn't move. The office buzzed in the background. Phone lines, distant printer noises, coffee machines warming. But this moment didn't belong to any of that. She stood without a word and crossed to the small glass-walled side office, the one she reserved for private calls and quiet reflection. She slid the door closed. No one followed. She powered on the secure laptop, plugged in the drive, and waited. The file appeared instantly. No encryption, just a name. myc8whisper.wav. She clicked, static, then low voices, the tail end of footsteps, paper shuffling, a pause, and then, relax, that part's already gone. They'll never see it. No mistaking the voice, no ambiguity in the tone. Her jaw set, but her expression didn't change. She clicked back, listened again. Relax, that part's already gone. They'll never see it. Again, a third time. The words didn't lose power. If anything, they gained weight, like a confession that had never been meant to leave the walls that birthed it. She leaned back in the chair. Not all the way, just enough to take in the moment. Her mind scanned everything. Patel's timeline, the metadata she'd cited, the unease in the room during his final statement. This wasn't just an arrogant aside. It was confirmation. Intentional, irreversible confirmation. She stared at the laptop screen for another long beat. Then calmly she removed the flash drive, placed it on the table, and tapped her knuckle once on the glass. Within seconds, her chief of staff opened the door. Everything all right? Schedule a second hearing, AOC said, her voice firm and low. And no leaks this time. The aide blinked. Second hearing? We don't have anything cleared with committee yet. Then get it cleared. Her tone wasn't angry. It was focused, centered, as if something had finally clicked into place. The aide nodded and vanished down the hallway. Alone again, AOC placed the drive back into the envelope, slid the post-it inside with it, closed the flap. Then she reached for a blank note card and began jotting notes. Not for a speech, not for Twitter, but for herself. A sequence, a date. One very specific sentence. Her handwriting was careful, almost mechanical. Outside the window, the Capitol dome glowed soft and golden in the mid-morning sun. It looked serene, historic, but she knew better. The truth didn't always march through those halls in fanfare. Sometimes it arrived quietly, in an envelope, with no name, and a whisper too precise to ignore. She folded the note card, slid it into her folder. The mic had been on. Now it was her turn to speak. She didn't call a press conference, didn't tweet, didn't leak the audio. In the days following the whisper, AOC kept her calendar clear of public spectacle and filled it instead with quiet meetings, closed-door briefings, and dead-end leads. She knew the tape alone wasn't enough, not in Washington. She needed context, corroboration, something that couldn't be dismissed as creative editing or a fluke of background noise. She needed history, and history had names. One of them was Daniel Rivas, a retired mid-level DHS systems liaison who now lived 2 counties outside D.C., spending most of his mornings sipping black coffee at a 24-hour diner off Route 29. He hadn't spoken to the press in over a year. AOC didn't bring a staffer, just a notepad and her silence. The diner was half empty. Soft jazz hummed from a worn-out speaker in the ceiling. Waitresses moved with the ease of routine, topping off mugs, slicing pie. AOC slid into the booth opposite him. "You came alone," Rivas said without looking up. "You wouldn't have spoken if I hadn't," she replied. He nodded slowly, stirred his coffee, then reached into a frayed folder and pulled out a single sheet. It was nothing earth-shattering, just an internal meeting agenda dated 3 years back. At the bottom was a line item, dashboard filtering protocol, field testing, wave 1. She scanned it. "This matches the metadata." Rivas gave a tired smile. "I figured it might." She leaned in. Why didn't you keep the originals? Any of you? He stared at the chipped edge of his mug. Because we knew where it would lead, and we knew who'd be standing in the way if it ever got there. A pause, then there were deletions. Everyone knew it. Memos that vanished, logs that didn't line up, filters pushed to servers under temporary labels. But no one was foolish enough to keep hard copies, except maybe one intern. Her pen froze. Name? I don't know. He was assigned for 3 months, IT division. Quiet kid, from Ohio, I think. His badge was revoked before his last week even started. She jotted that down. So why are you telling me this now? He looked at her for the first time. Because you didn't leak it. You didn't make it a circus. You listened. He tapped the side of his head. Like you heard something that wasn't meant for you, but refused to let it die. She exhaled slowly, closed her notepad. If he's out there, I'll find him. Rivas smiled faintly. Then be careful, because if he's out there, they'll be looking too.
AOC left a tip beneath the edge of her coffee saucer and shook his hand with both of hers. As she walked back to her car, she glanced up at the overcast sky. No camera lenses, no microphones, just the slow pressure of truth rising from underneath years of buried wires and rewritten logs. The audio was only the beginning. What came next could shake far more than a single hearing. Because now the whispers weren't just memories. They were questions. And they were getting louder. The office lights stayed on later than usual. Outside the Capitol windows, dusk pooled in slow violets and deepening blues, but inside AOC's team remained locked in debate, the room pulsing with the quiet intensity of real stakes. The flash drive sat on the center of the conference table like an artifact from another world. Silent, small, but too heavy to ignore. One aide paced. Another leaned against the wall, arms folded, brow tight. "We should go public," he said. "Leak the audio. Tonight. Let the media do what they do best." A second voice pushed back. "And if it backfires? If it's dismissed as a deepfake or twisted into some partisan stunt, we'll lose the moral ground we haven't even stepped onto yet." The first aide turned to AOC, still seated, fingers steepled under her chin. "They're already spinning. Every hour we sit on this is a headline they get to write without us." Another chimed in. "They're daring us to overplay." That's the trap. AOC didn't respond. Not yet. She kept her eyes on the flash drive, her mind weighing far more than timing. It wasn't just about optics. It was about who would feel what when the truth finally landed, whether it exploded or resonated. Quietly, she reached for a folder from the corner of her desk. It was labeled simply, "Constituent Letters," long reads. These weren't the ones for press releases or viral social posts. These were the ones that had arrived scrawled in shaky cursive or typed on yellowing paper. Letters that had no hashtags, only heart. She thumbed through them. A mother in Arizona. "Don't lose your composure. They'll say you're hysterical." A retired teacher from Pennsylvania. "Just show them. Don't shout. We're listening." A veteran from Queens. "Don't give them an excuse to change the channel." She paused on one, folded twice, written in fountain pen ink. "You don't need to punch to land a blow. Just speak clearly, and let the silence afterward do the rest." For a moment, AOC let the room blur into background. The noise, the pressure, the political oxygen swirling around her. Then she reached for a blank card, pulled a pen from the inside of her jacket, and wrote carefully, without flourish. "I won't shout, but I won't stay quiet either." She set it on top of the letter. A decision had been made. "I want a second hearing," she said aloud, lifting her head to meet every eye in the room. Not a soundbite, not a leak, a hearing. The aides quieted. "We prepare the questions, we verify the metadata. We build the map from whisper to directive. And when we're ready," she said, her voice steady, "we let the truth speak. On the record, under oath, with the whole country watching." One aide nodded slowly. Another finally exhaled. AOC stood, her expression composed, resolved. "Call the committee chair," she added. "Request a formal follow-up under new evidence." The flash drive remained in the center of the table, but it felt different now. Not a ticking bomb, but a sealed key. They didn't need to shout. They just had to make sure no one could pretend they hadn't heard. And that meant waiting, just long enough, for the silence to become undeniable. The formal request was filed at 8:07 a.m. on a Thursday, precisely worded, unembellished, and copied to only 5 recipients. It bore Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's signature and a single-line justification. Review of supplemental material related to prior testimony by Mr. Kash Patel, submitted for committee examination under Article 4, Procedure No Headlines, no press leak, no retweets, just a file number, a timestamp, and a perfectly timed whisper into the machinery of oversight. By mid-morning, the committee staff buzzed with speculation. Supplemental material was vague enough to mean anything. A policy brief? An appendix? A retraction from Patel's own team? Patel's attorney laughed when he heard the news. "She's bluffing," he said, skimming the memo with a smirk. "They had their shot. They've got nothing." Patel himself, seated in a quiet office across from a waiting room full of booked media appearances, read the request 3 times before chuckling. Desperate move. Hope she enjoys her 15 minutes. But he didn't ask what the material was, and no one warned him what was already in motion.
At noon, AOC stepped into a classified prep room deep in the Capitol's secure wing, where hearings were reviewed under red light and tight clearance. She was alone but for one committee clerk who met her eyes with a question he didn't voice. She nodded once. That was enough. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out the flash drive. It was ordinary, scratched at the edges. But the silence that settled over the room the moment she held it said otherwise. She handed it to the clerk without ceremony. "No copies," she said. "No digital transfers. One device, one record." The clerk nodded and slid the drive into the secure chamber recorder, a government-issued machine encased in black steel and surveillance-protected casing. The machine whirred gently. A green light pulsed. AOC watched the screen as the audio file loaded. No visuals, no timestamps, just a waveform. She recognized the shape. She'd seen it in her office, in her mind. It had become burned into her awareness, the moment truth stopped being hypothetical. The whisper began to play, not aloud but through the clerk's private headset. His expression didn't change. He simply reached forward, paused the recording halfway through, and opened the evidence logbook. "Authenticated," he said. "Logged. No anomalies." She signed the record. For a brief moment, neither of them moved. In another building, Patel was laughing through a green room interview about congressional theater. He joked that he might bring popcorn to the next hearing. The staff laughed with him. But across the Capitol, in a sealed room where words could not be erased or rewritten, a whisper had just become a document of record. AOC placed her hand briefly on the desk, not to rest, but to anchor. Quiet power didn't need a podium. It needed preparation. It didn't roar. It didn't gesture. It showed up, waited its turn, and left a trace that couldn't be unheard. As she walked out of the room, the corridor felt colder, not because of the air, but because the moment had changed. The truth was no longer in her possession. Now it belonged to the system. And the mic, still silent on the outside, had already begun to echo from within. The second hearing didn't open with fireworks. It opened with stillness, the kind that made viewers lean in rather than sit back. Outside, cameras lined the Capitol steps. Inside, the chamber filled early. Older viewers, many of whom hadn't watched C-SPAN since the Clinton impeachment, now sat in living rooms and VA hospitals across the country with the volume turned up and the coffee warm. Something about today felt different. Kash Patel entered 5 minutes early. This time he didn't wear a flashy tie or offer smirks to photographers. His steps were measured, his face clean-shaven, the bravado dulled but not gone. His team had advised him to appear serious, cooperative. He took his seat without comment, adjusted the microphone, and folded his hands. AOC entered with the same calm as before, but there was a precision to her motion now, a kind of quiet gravity that drew the eyes of even the skeptical. No folder this time, just a slim document sleeve and a pen that clicked once and didn't click again. The chairwoman called the hearing to order. Flashes from the gallery burst and faded. The room waited. Patel was sworn in again. His voice was lower this time when he said, "I do." There was no hint of amusement, just a calculated stillness. The chair yielded the floor. AOC adjusted her mic, nodded respectfully, and began. "Mr. Patel," she said, her tone steady but light, "last week you assured this committee there were no discrepancies in your timeline, no inconsistencies in your directives, and no manipulation of information under your oversight." Patel straightened slightly, hands still folded. "That's correct, Congresswoman." She offered a faint, polite smile. "Let's revisit one quote from last week." There was a pause, not dramatic but surgical. Viewers at home shifted forward. "You said," she continued, reading from a single line typed cleanly on her sheet, "there's nothing you'll find because there's nothing there." She let the words hang. Patel gave a small nod. "Yes, that remains true." AOC set the page down. "Let's test that." From the corner of the table, her aide passed her a binder. She didn't open it right away, just tapped it once with her pen. "In the past 10 days, new materials have been reviewed. Files sourced via whistleblower testimony, internal technical audits, and newly verified metadata timelines." Patel didn't blink, but one of his attorneys leaned in, whispering low. "I want to begin with just one entry," she continued. "An email chain from February 18th, referencing a filter protocol you claimed wasn't launched until March 3rd. You've already dismissed this as a draft discussion." "Yes," Patel replied. "That remains my understanding." AOC now opened the binder. Just one page. She slid it forward to the clerk for record. "This is the server log showing the upload of the suppression algorithm, February 16th, with your digital signature attached to the push request." The air shifted. No shouts, no gavel banging, just the unmistakable sound of certainty entering the room. Patel's lips parted, but no words followed. AOC didn't gloat, didn't raise her voice. Instead, she leaned back and said softly, "I'd like to continue walking through these, methodically." She turned the page. The trap had been sprung, but the teeth hadn't yet closed. And across the country, from Buffalo to Bakersfield, older viewers who'd lived through Watergate, Iran-Contra, and decades of televised truth-bending sat up a little straighter. Because this time, someone was laying it out like a map. No yelling, no performance. Just facts, sharpened by silence. And something told them it wasn't over yet. The binder closed with a quiet thud. Not theatrical, just final. AOC set her pen aside, glanced briefly toward the chairwoman, and gave a subtle nod. The clerk acknowledged. In the control booth above, a technician received the signal through an earpiece and cued the file. No buildup, no preamble, just a number on a form. Exhibit C, Audio 1. With a single click, the playback began. Static hummed for a breath. Then, "Relax. That part's already gone. They'll never see it." The voice was unmistakable. Kash Patel's tone, low, composed, and casual, slipped through the speakers like oil across marble. He wasn't angry in the recording. He wasn't nervous. He was certain. The room did not move. A collective stillness took hold, like the moment after a gunshot in an old Western. No coughs, no foot shuffling, just wide eyes and stunned silence. One camera in the upper gallery zoomed in on Patel's face. Another fixed on AOC. A third caught the chairwoman's knuckles tightening around the gavel. But she didn't use it. In the media pen, reporters froze. Some blinked, others whispered. Too quiet to be heard, but the energy shifted instantly. Something real had just entered the hearing. Not an accusation, not a performance. Evidence. Patel didn't blink. Not yet, but the slight flex in his jaw gave him away. He turned slowly toward his attorneys. One of them leaned forward, whispering fast, too fast. The other scribbled something on a notepad, then scratched it out. Their confidence fractured, not loudly but visibly. AOC didn't move. She didn't look at Patel. She didn't adjust her mic or posture. She simply waited. 3 seconds, 5 seconds. Enough to let the gravity of the words settle not just in the room, but across the airwaves. Then, with the composure of someone who didn't need to explain the obvious, she said one sentence. The microphone wasn't off. A ripple moved through the chamber. No gasps, just the quiet rustling of people recalibrating what they thought they knew. Journalists at their laptops began typing furiously. Someone in the back of the gallery whispered, "Did she just—" She didn't continue. She didn't need to. The words had spoken for themselves. The audio wasn't sensational. It was surgical. One sentence, stripped of defense. No room for misinterpretation. No spinning of tone or context. It wasn't said in anger. It was said because the speaker thought no one was listening. But someone had been, and now the entire country was. Outside the Capitol, live broadcasts cut into daytime programming. Senior citizens in waiting rooms gripped their walkers. Barbershops went quiet. A bartender in Milwaukee turned the TV volume up. On social media, the phrase, "that part's already gone," trended within minutes. Inside, Patel remained still. He was a practiced man, but no script accounted for this moment. This wasn't an ambush. It wasn't a partisan attack. It was a recording. AOC tapped her pen once. "We'll now proceed with authentication documentation, but the content," she said clearly, "is unedited and verified by the House technician chain of custody." Timestamp, 12 minutes after adjournment of the first hearing. The chairwoman didn't interject. There was no need. Patel's hands curled slightly into fists beneath the table. Still no words. AOC turned another page in her binder. Not with drama, but with purpose. She was no longer asking questions. She was reading the answers he didn't know he'd given. And the mic, once again, was still on. The audio hadn't even finished its second rotation on C-SPAN before the internet detonated. The moment AOC said, "The microphone wasn't off," someone clipped it, subtitled it in bold white text, and hit upload. Within 12 minutes, the hashtag #McGate topped trending lists across Facebook, Twitter, and even LinkedIn. Newsrooms scrambled. Headlines updated midstream. CNN cut to a split screen. MSNBC played the clip 3 times in a row. Fox News stayed silent for nearly an hour, then released a cautious lower third. Developing, AOC plays audio targeting Patel post-hearing. In veterans' homes across Ohio and Pennsylvania, TV rooms grew quiet, then filled with soft, spontaneous applause. One woman, a Navy widow, pointed at the screen and said, "Finally one of them listened back." In barbershops, diners, church parking lots, the response was visceral. Not choreographed, not partisan, just real. At Patel's Media Prep Center, 3 aides argued in whispers while 2 attorneys huddled by the window, one furiously texting. Finally, one approached the committee desk and requested a recess for clarity and consultation. The request was noted but not granted immediately. Inside the chamber, Patel sat rigid. The moment couldn't be undone. And worse, it couldn't be rephrased. Screenshots of his face, caught between practiced calm and flickering panic, circulated within minutes. Some added captions, others didn't need to. The stillness said enough. Outside the Capitol, the marble steps buzzed with fresh camera crews and bloggers, many of whom had no press credentials but knew a political fault line when they felt one. Protesters held up signs they'd clearly made just minutes before. "Mech never off." "We heard him." The echo was no longer metaphorical. In classrooms, political science professors paused lectures to pull up the video. In senior centers, group discussions sparked. One man remarked, "You can't call it theater if the confession's real." AOC didn't comment. She didn't post. No tweet, no podium, just her signature calm as she reviewed her notes for the next question. The flash drive now sat quietly in an evidence folder, but its impact reverberated far beyond the 4 corners of the room. It was a rare thing, not just truth caught, but truth confirmed, not shouted, not spun, played. And in that simple playback, something profound had happened. A sentence meant to vanish had become a line remembered. And the country, breath held for so long, finally started to exhale. By the next morning, the talking points were already circulating. A sleek PDF stamped with Patel's personal legal insignia was distributed to media contacts, influencers, and political allies. The headline read, "Context Matters, Full Scope of Patel's Statement Misrepresented." He wasted no time. Within 24 hours of the audio's release, Patel was on 3 conservative talk shows and 2 podcasts. On each, his tone was defiant, dismissive. "This is nothing more than political theater," he said to one host, a chopped-up whisper without context, dropped at the right moment to feed a leftist narrative. The host nodded, some laughed. One compared the situation to a government reality show, but the laughter didn't travel far, because while Patel toured the airwaves, something else was happening, something he couldn't spin from a studio chair. At DHS headquarters, a string of internal emails, previously marked as archived under restricted clearance, were quietly leaked to a mid-level tech publication. They detailed sudden content filter adjustments, backdated digital sign-offs, and a set of blank audit logs labeled Q2 pending. A whistleblower, still unnamed, attached a simple note to the leak. "If the mic caught one sentence, wait until you see what the logs say." Then came the resignations, not loud ones, not from top brass, but from 3 career staffers with over 15 years between them, each citing moral conflict as part of their exit memos. One quietly left a post-it note on her clear desk that simply read, "Silence was never in the job description." By the end of the week, the Department of Justice issued a brief, carefully worded statement confirming that informal inquiries had been initiated into DH's procedural practices during Patel's tenure. It wasn't a formal investigation, yet, but the implication was clear. Doors were being opened. Patel's legal team, caught between media denial and growing internal cracks, pivoted. Behind closed doors, strategy meetings turned tense. One lawyer, frustrated, reportedly said, "You can't call it out of context when the context is a quote in your own voice, on government time, under your clearance." Meanwhile, AOC said nothing. No victory lap, no press barrage. She simply showed up to vote, reviewed committee notes, and declined every interview. Her silence wasn't absence. It was pressure, and it worked. Because now quietly people began to speak. A mid-tier IT contractor, under protected disclosure, submitted a sworn statement to congressional staff outlining irregular deletion patterns. Logs that showed edits after midnight, access granted to accounts later marked inactive, and file names changed with no user trace. One file, he said, was named Filter Final Clean and was manually scrubbed an hour before Patel's final day in office. The name was on the server. The timestamp aligned with Patel's known login. No one shouted about it. No one needed to. The storm no longer roared outside. It churned within the system itself. And for the first time since the whisper was caught, Kash Patel wasn't answering questions. He was surrounded by them, questions that didn't arrive as accusations or headlines. They arrived as documents, as resignations, as silence breaking open from the inside. The threats came quietly at first, cryptic emails, vague phone messages, envelopes with no return address. Most said nothing outright, just fragments. "You've gone too far." "We see you." "Careful where you walk alone." Then the knocks started. Twice in 1 week, just past midnight, 3 soft taps on her apartment door. No note, no voice, no shadow left behind. Just the eerie sense that someone had been there, close enough to touch the doorknob, but not bold enough to ring. Her staff insisted on increased security. Capitol Police made routine patrols, but AOC declined a full detail. "Visibility is their strategy," she told her team. "Let's not give them the satisfaction of watching us shrink." Still, the unease lived in the walls. One night, after an especially long strategy session, she sat on the edge of her couch. The TV muted, fingers curled around her phone. She hesitated, then dialed the number she hadn't called in 2 weeks. Her mother answered on the second ring. "Hey, mija," the older woman said softly. "It's late." "I know," AOC said. Her voice was level but quiet. "I just needed to hear you." There was a pause on the line, a knowing silence that only mothers carry. "They're coming at you now, huh?" her mother asked gently. AOC didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked out the window, the Capitol dome in the distance, glowing like a lighthouse in fog. "Yeah," she said finally, "they are." She hesitated, then added, "But if they're pushing back this hard, it means they're scared." Her mother exhaled, not in fear but recognition. "They should be." They talked a few more minutes, about old friends in the Bronx, about a neighbor's graduation, about nothing urgent. Then her mother said, "Be careful, but don't dim down. You hear me?" "I hear you." After they hung up, AOC sat still for a long while. She didn't scroll, didn't draft a tweet. She just breathed. Then she reached for the notebook on the table and resumed sketching out the timeline for the next hearing. Every line, every link, every document cross-referenced. She didn't rush. She built. The threats weren't a surprise, but they were a signal. Power doesn't panic when it's winning. It panics when it's cornered. And that panic, she realized, was the clearest sign yet that the echo had reached the places no subpoena ever had. Behind the titles, behind the walls, into the rooms where truth was always meant to be just out of reach. So she worked, quietly, relentlessly. No speeches, no headlines, just layers, facts, names, timestamps, contradictions, all laid down like bricks in a road she intended to finish walking. By the time her staff returned the next morning, she had 4 folders ready and 2 new witness names flagged. She poured her own coffee, declined the morning news brief, and simply said, "We stay on course, and we don't blink." Because fear doesn't stop you when you're built on purpose, and intimidation doesn't work when the door you knock on already knows why you're there. She didn't speak louder. She just kept speaking. It arrived in the midday mail, wedged between policy memos and pre-printed invitations. No return label, no campaign seal, just an old-fashioned envelope, hand-addressed in blocky capital letters. The paper felt different, slightly rough, like it had come from someone's kitchen table, not a donor's desk. AOC opened it slowly, without ceremony. Inside was a single page, torn neatly from a lined notebook. The handwriting was clean but slightly shaky, each letter deliberate. "Congresswoman, I'm 78 years old. I served in Vietnam. I've watched every hearing you've been in this month. I want you to know something most folks won't say out loud. You didn't make noise. You made clarity. That room you sat in, it was built to out-talk people like you. But you didn't outshout anyone. You outlasted them. That matters. The last time I saw someone do that in government, I was a young man with a black and white television. It's been a long time. Keep steady. Roy M. Iowa." She read it once, then again. No hashtags, no asks. Just a voice from the quiet part of the country, where conviction didn't come with a spotlight. Where watching C-SPAN alone with a coffee had become a habit not out of entertainment, but out of hope. She folded the letter with care, creased once, neatly, and walked to her office bookshelf. From the top drawer, she pulled out a dark leather binder. Inside, a few pages of handwritten notes, 2 printed articles, and 1 small flash drive tucked into a sleeve. She placed Roy's letter alongside it, then closed the binder slowly. It wasn't validation she felt, it was weight. The good kind, the kind that settles you in place and reminds you why you're standing there in the first place. Outside her window, the Capitol remained still. Tourists took photos on the steps. A child ran up and down beneath the columns, laughing. Inside, no applause, no headline, no press release. Just one line, echoing in her thoughts like a quiet anthem. You didn't make noise. You made clarity. In the end, that's what she had aimed for. Not to perform, not to demolish, just to let the truth speak without interruption and trust that someone, somewhere, would hear it. Victory didn't need to announce itself. It could arrive on lined paper, folded in half, signed in ink, and slip between pages where the record could never erase it. The hearing room looked the same, but everything had changed. This time there were barricades outside. Reporters lined the marble steps at dawn, speaking in hushed tones over live feeds. Protesters pressed behind designated zones, waving handmade signs, some supporting AOC, others demanding Patel's resignation. The phrase "Mick8" had gone from viral to institutional. It appeared on coffee mugs, late-night monologues, even editorial cartoons in major newspapers. Inside the Capitol, though, there was no shouting, no frenzy, just preparation. The committee staff had doubled. Security was tighter. The witness list had expanded. This was no longer a sideshow. It was being treated as the real thing. The kind of hearing that gets quoted in history books or ethics textbooks. Kash Patel was subpoenaed, not invited. This time the language had changed. Compelled to appear. The phrasing alone made headlines. He entered the room just before 9 a.m., escorted by legal counsel. His expression was tight, focused. Gone was the veneer of media polish, the carefully chosen tie. Today he wore gray, no accessories, just the baseline image of a man under serious scrutiny. He didn't speak to reporters, didn't wave. He didn't need to. The cameras were already waiting. Inside the hearing chamber, the temperature felt colder. The silence had returned. Not the awkward kind, but the kind that precedes something consequential. And seated at the far end, already in place 20 minutes before the first gavel, was Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She sat alone, her folder open, her hands still. She didn't scroll her phone. She didn't whisper to her aide. She simply reviewed her documents one by one, each movement deliberate. The same flash drive from before now rested in a secure sleeve within the folder, worn at the edges, but unmistakable. The chairwoman entered. A few members exchanged quiet nods. Everyone understood. Today wasn't theater. Today was record. As the clock ticked closer to start time, photographers readied their lenses. One zoomed in on AOC's face, searching for something. Anticipation, nerves, even triumph. But what they captured was something rarer. Stillness. She had no need to perform. She was ready. Patel's attorneys whispered among themselves. One placed a binder down with a soft thump. Another reached for a water bottle, his hands slightly trembling. The press gallery was full. C-SPAN carried the hearing live again, this time with commentary from retired legal analysts. Several major networks overlaid the broadcast with live transcriptions. Across the country, viewing parties formed, at law schools and senior centers, in cafes with TVs usually reserved for football. And then, the gavel struck. The chairwoman spoke. This committee is reconvened under Article 4 oversight, pursuant to new evidence and supplemental disclosures. The witness is reminded they are under oath. The clerk turned a dial. Microphones flickered on. Every word, every pause, every reaction would now be captured, not just for today, but for history. AOC didn't raise her hand. Not yet. She simply turned a page in her folder. Because in this room, now fully awake, truth didn't need permission to speak. It only needed space. And space at last had returned. When her name was called, AOC didn't raise her voice. She didn't shift in her seat, didn't preface her statement with a long opening or dramatic flourish. She simply adjusted her microphone, opened her folder to the marked tab, and began. "Thank you, Madam Chair," she said evenly. "I will be brief and factual." She slid the first document forward, a color-coded timeline showing Patel's official testimony side by side with internal DHS metadata logs. Each contradiction was marked not with exclamation points, but with clean red lines backed by access logs and server stamps. No speculation, just sequence. The timeline presented in Mr. Patel's prior testimony, she said, conflicts directly with DHS server deployment records, internal communications, and source code activation logs authenticated by the House Technology Forensics team. She didn't pause to check reactions. Her voice stayed measured, paced like clockwork. Exhibit B includes corroboration from 2 independent DHS staffers, one of whom has submitted an affidavit under whistleblower protections. Their statements confirm the deliberate suppression of flagged data streams and the manual removal of audit logs in the 48 hours preceding Mr. Patel's departure from office. She passed the folder to the committee clerk. Then she looked up, not at Patel, at the room. The gallery had gone completely still. The only sound came from the low whir of camera rigs adjusting focus. AOC took a breath, then spoke words she had written and rewritten a dozen times. "This is not about humiliation. It is not about revenge. We are not here to punish. We are here to protect. This committee exists to ensure the truth is not buried beneath power and that memory does not bend to convenience." Her gaze was steady, not confrontational, anchored. "We don't seek revenge. We seek accountability." And now the room is listening. There it was, no escalation, just a shift in the current. The chairwoman leaned into her mic. "The gentlewoman yields?" AOC nodded once. "I yield back." She closed her folder quietly, clasped her hands, and said nothing else. The silence that followed was different this time. It wasn't stunned, it was solid, a kind of stillness that comes only after something undeniable is put into the air. The ranking member on the committee, a man known for procedural rigidity, cleared his throat, then leaned forward. Madam Chair, I move that we recommend this matter be forwarded to the Office of the Inspector General for formal review. The chairwoman nodded. Motion noted. No protests, no uproar. Even Patel's team stayed silent. The motion passed by voice vote. One sentence later, it was official. Further investigation was now underway. Outside the chamber, reporters typed furiously. Inside, AOC didn't celebrate. She didn't smile. She simply gathered her notes, slid the flash drive back into her folder, and waited for the hearing to conclude. Because this wasn't a victory lap. This was a step, a line drawn. And as her eyes settled briefly on Patel, expression unreadable, collar tight, she didn't feel triumph. She felt clarity, the kind that doesn't echo from applause, but from consequences finally catching up. The final gavel struck at 3:47 p.m. It echoed through the chamber like a quiet exhale, measured, final, and free of the tension that had clung to the walls for weeks. Chairs slid back, murmurs returned. Reporters darted out to file first drafts before the news cycle reset. Committee members exchanged nods, some solemn, some weary. Staffers began packing their folders, collecting their binders, unplugging devices. But AOC stayed seated. Not out of hesitation, but out of purpose. She watched the room empty slowly, like a tide receding after a storm. Patel exited under a swirl of cameras, his lawyers shielding him like stage curtains drawn too late. The gallery emptied next. The last of the photographers stepped backward through the threshold, taking one final frame of her sitting alone at the dais. And still she did not move. Only when the room had settled into silence again, true silence, did she gather her things. She reached for the flash drive. It looked the same, but someone from her team had added a new label, written in careful block print. Mike, never off. She held it in her palm for a moment, the weight of it familiar now, not technological but symbolic. A device that had carried 7 words across a nation, words that had been meant to disappear, but instead found permanence. From her bag, she pulled a black archival folder. She opened it, revealing a collection of documents that hadn't yet been scanned, tweeted, or quoted. A printout of the metadata timeline, a handwritten transcript of the veteran's letter from Iowa, the first version of her 3-sentence closing statement, marked up and redlined, now crossed out completely. At the center of the folder was a single page, truths that spoke themselves. She slipped the flash drive inside, then closed it. Her fingertips lingered on the leather edge for just a second longer before she tucked the folder into her satchel, clicked it shut, and stood. She didn't look back at the empty chamber. She didn't need to. What mattered had already been said, and more importantly, it had been heard. As she stepped into the hallway, one staffer standing at the far end paused to speak but held back. AOC gave them a small nod. Not an invitation, just acknowledgement. Because this wasn't the time for noise. It was the time after, where resolution settles into the bones, where justice isn't a roar, but a slow, steady fire that doesn't go out simply because the cameras do. Outside, the echo still rippled, through headlines, households, history, but inside her, it had quieted into something even more powerful. Not a microphone, a memory, and now it had a name. The first Saturday after the hearing, the Bronx was bright with late spring sun and the hum of weekend life. The streets buzzed with the usual rhythm, kids bouncing basketballs off graffiti-tagged courts, bodegas playing salsa through dusty speakers, and food carts filling the air with cumin and grease. But today the nods were different. AOC walked alone. No staffers, no cameras, just her and the people who sent her to Washington. She moved with the same steady pace she carried in the Capitol, but here, it wasn't armor. It was grounding. Outside a corner barbershop on East 138th, a barber stepped out, clippers still humming in his hand. He squinted into the sunlight, caught sight of her, and raised his chin. "Yo, Congresswoman!" She smiled, slowed. He gestured toward the TV inside. We watched you. Whole shop. Didn't even flip channels. She stepped closer. The TV behind him still had the CSPAN banner paused on the screen. The barber crossed his arms, voice dropping to something closer to awe. You said it with no yelling. That's what shook them. They didn't know how to fight back without a show to point at. AOC chuckled softly. It wasn't easy. He nodded. That's why it worked. As she kept walking, more people called out. Not for selfies, not for signatures, just to say they saw, that they knew. A group of seniors gathered outside a small community center waved her over. Folding chairs sat in a semicircle beneath a flapping canopy, with pitchers of iced tea sweating on a plastic table. One woman, maybe in her 80s, reached for AOC's hand with surprising strength. We watched all 3 hours, she said. Didn't blink. Her friend added, felt like someone finally said something we'd been waiting to hear for decades. AOC sat for a moment. No script, no sound bites. Just a paper cup of tea and stories of grandkids, rent increases, and how hard it had been to trust Washington. One man leaned forward and said, You didn't talk down to them. That's rare. I didn't need to, AOC replied. The facts did all the work. He smiled, tapping his cane once on the pavement. Sometimes clarity is louder than noise. As she continued through the neighborhood, she passed a mural, one that hadn't been there last time she visited. It was still drying. A simple microphone painted in grayscale, with the words still on looping around the cord. She paused. Someone had seen it. Someone had felt it. And they'd turned it into something permanent. At a small deli near the corner of Brook Avenue, the owner handed her a brown bag without asking. On the house, and he said, We don't forget when one of ours brings the truth home. She thanked him, then kept walking, bag in hand, heart steady. The storm in D.C. hadn't disappeared. It had only begun to shift. But here in the Bronx, under sunlight and against brick walls painted with stories, the impact wasn't in ratings or retweets. It was in eye contact, in quiet affirmations, in the simple truth that people felt seen. And this time, they didn't have to raise their voices to believe they mattered. By Monday, the editorial pages lit up like a synchronized signal flare. The New York Times ran the headline, The Return of Accountability. The Washington Post followed with, Ocasio-Cortez in the Power of a Pause. Even traditionally skeptical outlets leaned in, with opinion pieces titled, When Facts Walked In Quietly and What Happens When You Listen Back.
Cable news anchors, once eager for outrage, found themselves reviewing not shouting matches, but silence. The clip of AOC saying, We don't seek revenge, we seek accountability, aired on a loop across networks, often without commentary. It didn't need any. The soundbite wasn't explosive, it was enduring. Yet, even as praise rolled in, she declined every invitation to appear. No Sunday shows, no town halls, no press conferences. Instead, she waited. 3 days after the hearing, AOC uploaded a 10-minute monologue to her personal podcast. No ads, no music, just her voice, steady, unscripted, and unhurried. There's a rhythm in this town, she began. Say something big, say it loud, say it fast enough to drown out the truth. People think volume is power, but I've been learning that's not always the case. When I first heard that recording, 7 words, whispered after a hearing, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still. Because I knew the story wasn't in the sound. It was in the silence after. The stillness that told me. They never thought anyone would hear it. And when you realize a lie was never meant to be discovered, only forgotten, you understand your responsibility isn't to explode. It's to stay. She paused. Staying is harder than speaking. Waiting for the truth to settle instead of selling it in a tweet. Listening even when it hurts. You don't have to scream to be remembered. Sometimes all you need is a mic that never slept. And the people who never stopped listening. The audio ended without fanfare. No outro, no applause. But by the following morning, it had been clipped into reels, remixed into short-form videos, and even printed in full by The Atlantic under the title, The Mic Never Slept. It wasn't just viral, it was remembered. On the House floor, representatives on both sides of the aisle referenced the hearing during committee speeches. Not to grandstand, but to acknowledge that something rare had occurred. A moment when procedure didn't stifle truth. It amplified it. One senator, who hadn't publicly praised AOC before, was quoted saying, "She didn't pull a headline. She pulled a thread." In classrooms, students studied her cross-examinations alongside lessons on credibility. Corporate leadership trainings quoted her phrasing. Advocacy groups clipped her monologue into civic engagement workshops. But AOC didn't chase any of it. She returned to her district, to the binder, to the next hearing on unrelated legislation, on housing, on food security, on transportation access. Because this story wasn't about branding, it was about breaking a cycle. And in doing so, reminding a nation that accountability doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply waits. Beneath the noise, beneath the denial, inside one mic that never really turned off. And when it finally speaks, you hear everything. The Capitol was quiet now. The echo of footsteps had faded. The last elevator bell had chimed. Even the clatter of carts from the janitorial staff had grown soft, muffled beneath marble and history. Inside her office, dimly lit by the glow of a single desk lamp, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez moved with quiet precision. She reached for a slim archival box, the kind used not for show, but for safekeeping. It was labeled by hand. Internal, Hearings, Q2. She opened it carefully. No ceremony, no final speech. Just motion, grounded in intent. From the inside pocket of her binder, she removed the flash drive. Its label was still intact, its edges now slightly worn from being passed between hands, desks, hearings, and history. Mic? Never off. She looked at it for a moment, not with nostalgia, not with pride, but with a kind of earned stillness, the kind that follows not victory but completion. Next to the drive, she placed a small yellow sticky note. On it, written in ink, was a single sentence. Truth doesn't whisper. We just stopped listening. She closed the box, slid it into the second drawer of her cabinet, locked it. Outside her window, the Capitol lights shifted into their evening glow. Gold over marble, shadow against stone. She turned off her desk lamp, gathered her coat, and stepped out of the room. No press, no staff, no sound beyond the quiet hum of a government building returning to sleep. But something had changed. The silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. As she walked down the corridor, heels soft against centuries-old floors, a final voiceover began to rise, not loud, not commanding, but clear. They thought the mic was off. It wasn't. And maybe it never will be again. The screen faded to black. Then, in bold white letters, without music, without motion, the mic was still on.
This story reminds us that integrity isn't always loud, and truth doesn't need to shout to be powerful. In a time when politics often feels like theater, AOC's quiet persistence challenged that rhythm. She didn't interrupt or out-yell, she outlasted. Her calm dismantled a system built on performance, and her silence exposed what noise had long hidden. The flash drive became more than evidence. It became a symbol of what happens when someone chooses clarity over spectacle. This wasn't a tale of revenge. It was about responsibility, about what it means to hold the line when the lights dim and the world isn't watching. Because sometimes the most important mic is the one they didn't mean to leave on. Question for you. Have you ever seen a moment where silence spoke louder than words and changed everything? If this story touched you, don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to Alexandria Rising Stories, where every voice matters and every story echoes far beyond the screen. This story is a fictionalized and dramatized narrative created for educational, inspirational, and storytelling purposes. While it may be inspired by real public events, people, or societal issues, it includes imagined dialogue, reconstructed scenes, and character interpretations meant to highlight broader themes of justice, dignity, and resilience. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. We do not intend to defame, mislead, or harm, but to invite reflection and meaningful conversation. Thank you for watching Alexandria Rising Stories.